Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question. If you didn't have your ailments, would you still compete in powerlifting, or would you compete in some other strength sport? Now, for the people who aren't really familiar with my ailments, I have bilateral Meniere's disease. I actually have fairly severe. I've actually reached what's called the burnout stage in it, to where having it in both ears, I have zero sense of balance medically. I cannot pass a balance test. If you put a blindfold on me and ask me to walk across the room, I will fall flat on my face, or I will turn to the side and walk in a circle and fall over. It's quite hilarious. I literally do not possess a sense of balance at all. So it's not even a case of bad balance. I do not possess a sense any more than a person who's blind possesses a sense of vision. So now the nature of my ailment has changed a bit over the years, but so that being said, that does limit what field sports I can do because I'm very, very visually cued on everything. So any sport that would get a lot of sweat in my eyes or something like that would really very quickly become a problem for me. So I would love to do something like strongman, but I think some of the carries, the lift and carries and other things could be potentially hazardous to me. I could get injured very, very easily. I would love to do strongman, but at least with powerlifting, I've been able to train myself to squat again by doing a lot of balance stuff. I did a lot of chain work early on, a lot of squats with chains and things with accommodating resistance band, because those swinging chains really trained a lot of stabilizers to force me to have better balance, and it was a really useful tool for me. So I've trained myself to be able to do these basic lifts again through musculature and using my stabilizer muscles in my core to keep myself upright rather than any sort of sense of balance or orientation. So I can do the powerlifting. I'm medically cleared to compete in powerlifting. A lot of other strength sports, there's just no way. There's no way I could go play rugby or do strongman or anything like that. As much as I might love to do it, the risk isn't worth it for me, unfortunately. But I think strongman is really awesome. All right, next question. What's your opinion on Rich Piana's 8-hour arm workout? We already know what you think of his anabolic jugs of air. Oh, lol. Yeah, he wrote lol. But what do you think about him saying that the workout adding an inch to your arms, 8 hours, 16 mini workouts with 16 protein shakes? Oh my God, I can't believe people are asking me about this. What do I think about it? I think it's absurd. I think it's a good marketing hype for Rich because Rich likes to hype things up. And I mean, that's his niche. That's what Rich does. That's what he does well. But as far as this arm workout, these little mini arm workouts for 8 hours and all these protein shakes in between actually doing any real benefit from growing your arms any larger? No. In fact, for most guys who aren't on a lot of drugs, doing more than just a handful of sets for your arms in general in a single workout or in a single day is probably not going to add any additional growth. There is something to be said for ultra high volume training when you are using quite a few anabolic drugs, but the 8-hour thing is way beyond excessive, even for that purpose. But does it draw attention to Rich? Does it hype up what he does? Is it extreme and does it fit with his philosophy that he markets? Yeah, absolutely. So I understand why he does it, but would I recommend this or think that anybody should do it? No, it's just silly. All right, next question. What foot width angle while squatting make much of a difference in performance and injury prevention? This is tricky, and I don't want to use this line, everyone is different, because everyone is not different. There are only so many variations. However, let me just show you guys the issue here. I'm going to try to splice in some photos of hip angles, of how much hip angle of the actual hip sockets in humans can vary, and think about those degrees of angle there. And then the same thing with femurs. If you notice the position on the femurs, of how much those can vary. And if you look at those things, those are the amount of genetic variation from person to person, and that's not even ethnically based. That seems to be quite arbitrarily spread out through all ethnic groups. So it's not even saying, oh, because someone has white skin or black skin that they're going to have a different hip angle. No, it is literally that varied inside of ethnic groups and inside of people from reasonably similar regions of the world. There's just that much variation there. And accordingly, you have to find your own foot position, toe position, stance width, and everything that gives you the least hip pain, the less wear and tear on your hips. Because if you look at some of those structures, that structure would be a fantastic foot position and width for one person could actually cause damage and inflammation of the joint for someone else if they had a vastly different stance. And so you've got to find the stance that's going to work for your individual anatomy. And no, it's not a case of everyone is different and we can't explain it. We know that there are differences in the anatomy, and there's only so many variations, only so many degrees that thing will go different from one person to the other, and every person is somewhere in that range. So you have to find those positions that are pain-free, that do give you the right torque and leverages and everything that you want coming out of the bottom, and that takes some experimentation, and sometimes it takes a good coach to identify in an athlete what really is going to work for them there, because it just isn't the same for everyone because of those physiological differences. And we can see there, if you look at those bone structures, it is very apparent. If you think about that, just those angles, you look at those angles of insertion of the joints and where the hips are placed, the actual hip joints, you can see right there why the stance seems to need to vary so much from one squatter to the next when they're actually squatting really heavy weight and getting serious. That makes sense. When you look at that, that explains it perfectly. You can see it visually right there. If you just look at those and the way they would insert in and think about those different angles, it's just because we have that much variation in our hip structure as a species. You got to play around with it. And there's no way for you to assess it without experimenting with it. No one can just look at you walking down the street and pick it out for you perfectly, unless they just got lucky. All right, next question. Hi Jason, in your video, I don't have time for full body routines. You mentioned about warm-up sets. What is the correct way to do warm-up sets? How much rest between them? And do you do more sets the heavier the weight gets? Thank you. I'm not really sure what you mean by more sets the heavier the weight gets you. Whatever your program calls for is what you do. But as far as warm-ups, I am not a believer in excessive warm-ups. I don't think they necessarily prevent injuries any more than a general warm-up of walking does. Go for a 5-minute walk. You're as warm as you need to get. I generally, if I were to do full warm-ups, and I used to do those when I trained, you guys will see me do like a squat or a bench press. Let's say my bench press, if I'm building up to just training maxes, you'll see me do something like 3 to 4 reps with an empty bar, 3 reps with 60 kilos, 3 reps with 100 kilos, 1 rep with 120, 1 rep with 140, and then I'll see if I'm going to go heavier from there. That's the extent of my warming up. Squats, everything else are similar. And with deadlifts, because I don't even warm up that much for deadlifts. My deadlift, I generally do maybe 2 warm-up sets before I go heavy. And they're 1 to 2 reps. So that's usually what I advocate. And it's not an issue of injury. I've never been injured doing that. The only injury I've ever gotten from training major injury in the years that I was doing it was back in 2004. And that was actually on my 5th work set after warming up, and that was my full bicep rupture doing a deadlift. So I'm just not a fan of them. I think they take a lot of energy out. They limit the amount of weight you can use for your heaviest sets if you put too much energy into them. However, the reason a lot of people are successful with those high warm-ups is that they use them for more metabolic fatigue. They're actually doing all these high reps leading up to their heavy work. They're getting more metabolic fatigue, and it's possibly inducing more growth, which goes to show you that sub-maximum weights do, even with high reps with weights that are way light that you could probably squeeze out 5 or 10 more reps with that same weight, do still induce some potential hypertrophy through metabolic fatigue. But the thing is, when people are doing these really high rep warm-up sets, those are actually work sets. They're not warm-up sets. And I don't really like the philosophy behind it for ramping up to training maxes or ramping up to do heavyweight. That's just a personal philosophy. I don't think it's particularly useful. I don't see the point in it. And yes, I know that there are some world record holders who do them that way anyways. I don't think that the warm-up sets are responsible for them setting the world records. And I don't think they particularly help reduce injury. So do whatever you want to do with it. I'm not an advocate of excessive amounts of warming up. I usually recommend small mini jumps with low reps. And if you're doing high rep sets, something like 8 reps or more, I wouldn't even bother with more than 1 warm-up set personally. That's just me, and that's how I've always done it. All right, next question. Best grip exercises. Well, obviously, some of the best grip exercises you can do is to just make sure you have good bars. Do your chin-ups, pull-ups, deadlifts, rows, all of that without straps. If you need additional grip work beyond that, there's a lot of really effective tools out there. Now, the things that don't work are wrist curls. Those are great for hypertrophy to make your hands bigger, make your forearms bigger. They don't really do much for your actual grip strength. you need to develop actual static strength for that. So things like barbell holds, hold from the bar where you hold a chin up bar and hold onto that. Even one arm holds that way. Farmer's walks, or even roll-ups. Like you can actually take a bar or a broomstick and put a string on it and hang a weight plate and roll it up and down with wrist rollers is what I think I've heard them called over the years. There's a lot of really useful tools you can do out there. Anything that just trains your grip that forces you to hold on to the weight. Even if that's a deadlift with 50% or 60% of your max, that you just deadlift up and just hold it. In fact, I've seen some guys use lockouts on deadlifts to develop a massive grip strength with a weight heavier than their normal deadlift. So they only have to move it a few inches, deadlift it 6 inches in a rack pull, and just hold on to it until it slips out of their hands. Things like that can improve your grip strength. But the main thing is just getting enough volume, because grip strength has largely to do with the stamina of your grip. So getting enough volume on your grip work can be the biggest issue. Enough total seconds holding on to it. All right, next question. In your last couple of training vids, I noticed your head raises off the bench. A couple people asked me about this, by the way. When lowering the weight on the bench press, is this something that will get you red lighted in a meet? Depends on your federation. No federation that I compete in or plan on competing in anytime in the future will it get me red lighted. So therefore it's okay. There are some that do not allow it. I don't care about those because I don't compete in them. So why am I doing it? It's a mental cue. I find that for me, as you guys know, for me, one of the hardest things is I lower the bar really slow on my bench press. And no matter what I do to train myself to get a faster eccentric rep, I have failed for months and months and months to do it. Even when I was practicing it every single day, it made such a marginal difference. The only thing I find that helps at all is if I let my head come up off the bench, as the bar's coming down, that last few inches I can lower it faster. That lets me have more energy for the concentric rep because I'm not wasting energy and fatiguing myself with that slow eccentric. So it can help my max potentially. And I find that letting the head come up helps with that. It helps me not control the weight as much on the way down and get past that mental hang up. And that's the only reason I do it. Simple as that. All right, next question. I'm currently recovering from a surgery, and I'll have to take 2 weeks from any physical activity. How much muscle and strength will I lose, and how can I minimize the damage? I get asked this stuff a lot. I've answered this type of question multiple times. How much strength you will lose anytime you are forced for medical reasons or any other reasons to take downtime from training, how much you will lose is 100% irrelevant. Worrying about it will probably cause you to lose even more. Don't think about it. Don't worry about it. You cannot avoid it. So why waste a second of your time stressing about something that you have zero ability to change? Now we know that stress and stress hormones themselves are catabolic. So if you're stressed about it and you're worried about it, you are potentially going to lose even more because you worried about it instead of just ignoring it and not caring about something you can't change. It's completely irrelevant how much you can avoid losing. The only way you can minimize it would be to avoid going into a calorie deficit. Make sure you get enough protein. And if you can't train at all because it's medical, then there's nothing else you can do. If you can do any training, that will help. But that training needs to be within the confines of what your doctor allows. Because if you bust something back open, or you bust open a suture or stitches, or you rupture something after a surgery, guess what? You're going to lose even more muscle and strength because you got impatient and you were stupid about it. So you've lost even more because you got impatient and worried about it. The best thing you can do, follow your doctor's orders on it. However long they tell you not to train, don't train. Make sure you get plenty of protein, a good diet, get lots of sleep, and don't worry about your lost gains or get stressed about it because that will make you lose even more. That's literally all that you can do. Just accept it. And then as soon as you're able to train again, regain what you lost. All right, next question. A couple of weeks ago, you briefly mentioned powerlifting's inherent dangers while addressing a bodybuilding dieting question. Could you go into detail? At what threshold can an amount of weight actually be detrimental in the long run? It's not the amount of weight. I know plenty of guys who lifted enormous amounts of weights who historically have lived up to be very healthy into their 70s, 80s, and in at least one case into their 90s. The factor is not the weight. It's all the other stuff that goes with powerlifting. It's all the high amounts of drugs. Because let's be honest, if you're slamming down tons of steroids for 30 or 40 years straight, you're probably shaving some years off your life. at least a few years. I think most of us will agree with that, whether you're pro or anti-anabolic. If you are mega dosing steroids for 30 or more years, you're probably shortening your life a little bit. You're probably going to harm your long-term health a little bit. And in some cases, maybe a lot of bit, depending on what you used. I don't think anyone will disagree with that point. So the drugs, and you're not going to compete at the very serious level without drugs in most cases. Very few people do, and a lot of the guys who claim to be drug-free and drug tested are still on a lot of gear. Just because they claim they're natty and pass a drug test doesn't mean anything. So that's always a risk. The other thing is the extra body weight in the food. A lot of powerlifters eat their way to being more successful at the sport. Holding a lot of body weight, even if it's muscle mass, isn't always healthy beyond a certain threshold. So there's that to consider. And then a lot carry extra body fat, particularly if they're drug-free. So then they need to carry more body fat to be at the same body weight. And to get up to that body weight and get the leverages and everything they want, they overeat and gain fat on top of it. In the long term, that's not particularly healthy. It's all these factors like this combined with bad technique, not balancing muscles. It can cause wear and tear on joints because people don't bench correctly. They don't properly build up their rear delts. They use a grip that's too wide on their bench press. Things like that will tear up your shoulder joints over time. So it's all those things to consider. It's not the actual heavy weight being used as long as it's within your ability to do. That's not the actual issue. It's all those other factors. The drugs, the diet, the oftentimes bad technique and muscle imbalances. That is what creates the health risk. And is it as bad as bodybuilding? No. But is it something to consider? Is it significant enough that you need to consider and weigh it out? If you're going to get really competitive, yes it is. Because at the extreme levels, nothing competitive is healthy. Powerlifting can be very healthy at the non-ultra extremely competitive levels, but when you're trying to get medals and you're going to win and you're going to compete at the international level, there can definitely be some health compromise, just like with any other sport. That's just a reality. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.